I see some of our snowbirds have come back to the roost this morning. Welcome back. Welcome back to the battle between spring and winter. Right? We're in that state right now, and if you're like me, you're anticipating summer. You're anticipating spring. I am always a fan of the sun. I love the sun. During those winter blues, so often you get depressed and there's darkness, but in the summer, you feel that warmth of the sun on you, and you just soak it in. And you physically feel warm, and it just makes you feel better, and it's so life-giving. I love the sun, and I can't wait to just kind of take it in. The sun is an amazing thing. I'm not sure how many of you have had the opportunity to be up in the sky, maybe be up in an airplane or whatever, and to see a sunrise over the mountains. I mean, just right when it peaks over the horizon. And you just see the very tippy tops of the mountains are full of light. And I just imagine being there after a long winter's night on a mountaintop, and that first sunlight that just takes you in, and you just feel warm, and it's like you can almost feel the presence of God. But in the same way that we see the sun on the mountaintops, you can also see the dark valleys down below. Because the mountains are only letting part of the sun through. The sun hasn't peaked in the sky yet. And so you see the top of the mountaintops, but you see the dark valleys. And you imagine waking up there and it's still dark, it's hard to see. If you've ever gone from the light to the shadows, you know that the shadows where the sun's not shining directly, it's colder there. And maybe even you feel a little bit of the darkness, the absence of something good and natural as light. I think these two realities, the mountaintops and the valleys, encompass our spiritual lives so much as well. We've experienced those mountaintops where we've experienced the goodness of God and our emotions are high, and just like it's almost like this heavenly experience where you're taken up and you physically feel like the wonder of God's presence in your life, and things are good and things are great in your life, and we've experienced the mountaintops, and in those times we say, "Oh God, you are good, you are good." But I think we've also, in our lives as believers, experienced the valleys. The hard times. The times where we may feel more absence than presence, more darkness than light. As we look at some of the characters in the Bible who've experienced both mountaintops and valleys, we see people like Job. Job had it going on. Job was a wealthy man, well respected in his community. He had large herds. He had many children. Life was good for Job. He had this amazing relationship with God, so much to the point that God was bragging on Job. Look at Job. Oh, Job. Oh, that's a guy who's faithful. And what happens in a single day? He loses it all. He goes from the mountaintop to the valley. Raiders come in and steal his herds and kill things, and in a moment his wealth is destroyed. Next, he gets a news from a servant. Hey, by the way, there's been an attack, and you've lost not only the loss of your herds, but there's been a storm, and your children are dead now, and you've lost everything, and it's just you and your wife that is left. Like Job is in the midst of a valley, and he sits down in sackcloth and ashes, and he's mourning. And he has friends who come along next to him and say, oh, just in case you're not down far enough, by the way, this is all your fault. Obviously, you've done something wrong to God, and you've sinned, and so all of the bad things that have happened to in your life are your fault, Job. Like, just when you can't get any lower, Job dives down lower. And he has physical ailments that are attacking him. He's experienced the valley. Have you experienced that valley? The loss of prestige, the loss of wealth, the loss of position, a job, maybe losing friends. Maybe your valley is a spiritual one where you feel absent from God. And in those times, it can be so easy to say, well, maybe God's not so good. I mean, look what I've lost. Why would a good and loving God do this? Maybe God isn't so great. Maybe God isn't so powerful. Maybe God isn't so trustworthy. Take someone like Naomi. Naomi too experiences a husband who loves her and children, and she's living in Israel, and she's blessed. And then one day her husband picks up and moves to another land because there was famine there. And in a very short period of time, she loses her husband. Her husband dies. Now, men were the breadwinners, but at least she has her sons to provide for her in her old age. Very shortly after, she loses both her sons. She's been to the mountaintop, but now she's experiencing the valley. She's experiencing the loss of someone that she loves. She has experienced the loss of protection in her old age. People to provide for her. So angry does she get. So desperate, and those feelings of darkness so overwhelm her that she says, my name is no longer Naomi. My name is Mara, which means bitter. She is bitter. She's experiencing the dark valley of loss. Maybe you've experienced a loss, a dark valley like Naomi, like Mara. The loss of children. The loss of a loved one. An uncertainty about what the future holds for you. You've either been through that dark valley or you're going through that dark valley now, and it's difficult to find hope. It's difficult to see the light in the midst of that dark valley. David, too, the author of this Psalm 23, knows what those mountaintop experiences are like. David is a shepherd who has been anointed king. Like, you don't make that switch in your job, right? You don't go from a lowly shepherd to the king, and yet he's been anointed king. But he's not there yet. He's not king yet. He's got to wait till Saul is no longer there. David experiences the mountaintop where he kills Goliath, this tremendous act of God, because obviously weak and lowly David can't do it by himself. David has experienced the mountaintop where it's easy to say, look what God is doing. Life is great. I've married the king's daughter. I'm going to be king someday. Life is good. But David, too, experiences the dark valley. This king, Saul, is out to kill him. He gets jealous and he tries to kill David, so much so that David has to run for his life. I don't know if you've ever feared for your life or felt like others are out to get you. David is on the run. Later in his life, even after he's been anointed king, David feels the sting of betrayal. His son forms a rebellion to try to defeat him. I'm not sure if you've ever felt the dark valley of betrayal, where trust in other people gets tough, where there's darkness, or it might be easy to wonder, is God really good? If I'm going through this dark valley, if I'm going through this feeling of the absence of God's presence, is God really good? Maybe he's not. Maybe God isn't all that he's cracked up to be. We've experienced the dark valleys in our lives. Maybe your dark valley is something different. Maybe your dark valley is just a feeling of spiritual distance from God. The loss of purpose, the loss of meaning. We've been through those dark valleys where we wonder, how are we going to get out? And it seems like it's this ever spiraling pit from darkness to greater darkness to greater darkness. Here's the thing about the dark valley. We can't find our way out ourselves. And in these dark valleys, it is so easy to question God, to question God's character. But one of the things we see from these Bible characters who have been going through tremendous mountaintop experiences and dark valleys is at the end of the day, they put their faith and hope and trust in God. Look at someone like David. In the midst of his dark valley, we read Psalm 23. This is what he says, talking about these dark valleys. He says, even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. David recognizes something. That if he's following God to green pastures, if he's following God beside still waters, if he's following God, then it takes movement from one mountain to another. And sometimes that will mean we go through these dark valleys. But just because we go through these dark valleys in life does not mean that God is not present with us. David acknowledges, you are with me. The dark valley is not the absence of God's presence, but the times we need to trust in God's presence all the more, leading and guiding us through. It says, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. The rod was an act of protection, the staff, an act of leading the sheep. God gives comfort in the midst of our dark valleys. David continually puts his trust in God. In his dark valleys, he trusts as if he's on the mountaintop. Take someone like Naomi who has gone through a lot, and God sends an emissary to her by the name of Ruth to give her hope. And we see Ruth working in tremendous ways, and we see almost that Naomi gets it. She understands how God is working in this whole situation. She trusts in the plans of God and that God will bring provision for her. And that's exactly what we see happening. Ruth marries Boaz and has children, and those children have children on down the line for even Jesus. And so God works in Naomi's bitterness, in her darkest valleys, to bring a mountaintop. Or even take someone like Job. Job, who's lost everything, yet refuses to lose his faith. Job's been to the deepest valleys, and even in the midst of it all, in the midst of the darkness, he says, I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end he will stand upon the earth. in his deepest, darkest valley, Job trusts like he's on the mountain. He trusts in the goodness of God. Jesus, too, has experienced the mountaintop of Palm Sunday, which we'll celebrate next week. When he comes into Jerusalem and is lauded by the crowds, Hosanna, Hosanna, the King of the Jews, oh, we worship you, oh, Jesus is great. The streets are lined, he gets a parade, everything is good. He's experienced the mountaintop. And then a week later, not even a week later, in the garden, Jesus, knowing what this next day would bring, when he would be betrayed by his best friends. Jesus, who knew he would be abandoned by other best friends, by these people who he's been pouring his life into. He knows that he's going to be tortured and die, and Jesus has this dark night. And it says he's literally sweating blood, which is an actual phenomenon that happens when people are under incredible stress. And he says, if it is possible, take this from me. Take this cup from me. Jesus is experiencing this dark night of the soul. He's in the deep valley, and yet he trusts in the goodness of God. He trusts like he's on the mountaintop. To put his faith and his hope and his trust in God. When we look at our lives, my guess is if we've experienced the mountaintop. We've experienced the good times, but we've also experienced the dark valley. When it comes to living a life without lack, living a life of great faith, it looks like this. Life without lack trusts in the goodness of God. Wrong slide, but it's all right. Life without lack trusts in the goodness of God. It trusts like it's on the mountain. In your deepest, darkest valleys, when life, it doesn't seem fair, when life doesn't seem right, when everything is out to get you, when you can't find your way out by yourself, it can be easy to question the goodness of God. In our dark times, when we're in the shadows, we're in the deep, dark physical valleys, we never question how bright the sun is. We know. Even in the dark valleys, we trust that the sun is warm, the sun is bright, the sun is life-giving. And in our dark valleys, we trust like we're on the mountaintop. Living a life without lack continually puts our hope and our trust in God, that he is not just present with us, but leading us through the dark valley. I don't know what your dark valley may look like, and I don't know how long you will be in your dark valley either. For some, our dark valleys are short. For some, it may go on for weeks, for months, for years. For Mother Teresa, a nun who had dedicated her life to the work of God, her dark valley was much of her life. She writes about this later on. Some of her notes are published. And she says, except for 1 month, where she had this incredible spiritual closeness to God, and it was just overwhelming to her. Other than that 1 month back in the 50s, she had experienced a long lifetime in the valley where it just seemed God was distant. And yet, she continued to trust in the goodness of God, even in her dark valley. She trusted as if she was living on the mountaintop. And I think she gives encouragement to us as well, because a life without lack also points us to others. Points others to the light. Sometimes it's calling down from the mountaintop, come closer, the light is here. Sometimes it's going down into dark valleys with the light and the hope of Christ shining forth. Helping others to see the way out. Being present with people, saying, trust in the goodness of God. This is what Mother Teresa said as she's experienced a life of living in a dark valley. She says this, go out into the world today and love the people you meet. Let your presence light new light in the hearts of the people. Maybe this morning you're on a mountaintop. Maybe things are good. Or maybe it's just like every day, like it's not good, it's not bad, but man, I know God loves me. It's easy to trust in the goodness of God. Maybe that's you this morning, but you've also experienced the dark valleys in your life as well. Or maybe you are in the dark valley right now. Maybe you're in that valley where it's hard to see your way out. It's hard to trust in the goodness of God when things aren't going the way that you imagine they will. I think it's good to acknowledge that we have both here this morning. Or maybe you're in the dark valley, but you've experienced the mountaintop. This morning, I want to just use some imagery, some congregational response of hope. In just a moment, we're going to give an opportunity to light some candles. If you have been through a dark valley, if you've been through hardship and you know what that feels like, but you're on the mountaintop right now, and you just want to, as an act of encouragement to those people here this morning, say, I've been and experienced what you've been experiencing, but hold on to hope. Hold on to the trust and the goodness and the mercy of God, and trust that He is with you. I want to invite you up to light a candle, then go back to your seat. Or maybe this morning, you're in that dark valley right now. Where as an act of trust and faith, you want to light a candle and just say, God, I'm holding on. In the midst of my darkness, in the midst of my dark valley, I'm holding on. Holding on to you, holding on to my trust and my faith and my hope in you. I too invite you to come light a candle as an act of faith and hope and trust in the goodness and the mercy and the love and the presence of God. We're going to have opportunity for response. There'll be candles up here. Ken and I will be holding candles. Come light a candle and go back. To be a light for those around you, or to hold on to hope in the midst of your darkness. As the worship team comes forward, we're going to have some movement to get ready for the response. But I want to invite you to come forward. And then at the end, we'll just be holding our candles in the dark.